This beautiful anemone flower is what we are going to loosely paint on silk today. For freehand silk painting, it's probably best to use a fading marker if you want to outline the design ahead of time. And this is no-name fading marker that you can get at a sewing supply store. But I think the line of the marker is too light, so I'm going to show you in the reference picture what order to move in. So first, the general outline. It will be easier for you if you can see what shape reminds you of. In my case, it's more like a trapezoid. Then you can find the center of the flower, trying not to make a mistake with its location. You may want to have a vertical and horizontal line through the center to make it easier to navigate. And I would first decide on the largest petals. And if we take these two petals, we try to notice which one is higher and which one is lower. When we look at these two petals, we look at how they relate to the vertical line. And now it will be quite easy to find the place, size and shape of the other petals, smaller ones. And this is how it worked out for me. For painting, as always, we need paper towels. I will use two dyes, ultramarine and purple, and a palette, of course. But first I'm going to correct this petal a bit. Water control is crucial in this technique, unless you use magic sizing, which prevents the dye from spreading on the silk. And that's why you need both a palette and a paper towels. The white plain plate is very handy to pick up the right tone or value of the color. And I start with the highlights as usual. I think you'll be more comfortable seeing both the palette and the painting. When I feel that the brush is too wet, I dry it on a paper towel. Since this is a loose painting and it assumes some sketchiness, there is no need for absolute precision. However, in order to get a more beautiful and convincing result, it's always better to be guided by a good reference. As I noticed above, controlling the wetness of the brush is very important here, and that's why I use a palette, because on a palette the water from the dye evaporates quickly and the dye, like a watercolor, dries out. And I'll show you this closer a bit later. If you've ever painted with watercolor, you know that I'm talking about. And here, as in watercolor, I use a very concentrated dye. It dries on my palette and it becomes like watercolor paint. And thus it's very easy for me to find the right tone and degree of wetness. I really hope I'm explaining this clearly. If not, please leave a comment and I'll try to clarify it again. The next step, after all the highlights are mapped out, I darken the tone, going into half shadow. And when I paint with a semi-dry brush, the paint doesn't really spread out, and there are even gaps between the strokes. And as usual, at the initial stage, I paint not individual petals, but large spots without separating on this or that petal. If you squint a lot, you can see that these two petals tonally merge, and that's why I paint like this, like one big patch. Then at the stage of detailing we can mark them somehow if we want, but I haven't decided yet how detailed this flower will be. And I might like to keep it sketchy, we'll see. Now I'm moving into the darker areas. Still, I don't let the paint spread too much, so that I can still keep the shape of the flower. And when the dye leaks where it shouldn't, I use a porous paper. Well, and since the dye will go on spreading and I would like to leave the flower in these forms, I use a hair dryer. And now the anemone is dry enough to add detail. You can see that the dried dye looks like watercolor. That's what I talked about a bit earlier. And I really like that it can be soaked and dried many times and it doesn't change its qualities. In general, I see many advantages in this approach to painting silk. The first is that with a palette you can always get the right color and tone. The second advantage is that, like in watercolor, you can paint drier or wetter. At this stage we can make some lines clear, emphasize shadows and details. You can make the edge of the shadow sharp, like in the reference picture. And here the shadow is interrupted and I interrupt it too. Maybe you noticed that I don't check too carefully with the reference. I have kept the middle of the flower light, but I would still like to tighten it up for the photo. As always, likes, subscriptions, comments are warmly welcomed. And I know some of you would like to support me. Well, I did a little research and find out that the most convenient platform for you is Buy Me a Coffee. And you will find the link in the description. And I'm going to make this shape more spherical. As you can see, traces of the marker remain in places where moisture hasn't gotten it. But don't worry, it will wash off with washing. Now you can add the veins as I did in this video, but I would probably stop at this point. Well, I wish you good luck in mastering your silk painting skills, and I'll see you.